Do you think this idea of community is something important for you?
I definitely
community as artist community, huh?
Yeah, artist community, definitely, because I feel like I had that a bit in New York, but I was just I was working in galleries. I worked at Carmen International, my current gallery in LA, and then in New York I worked at Gavin Brown for like half a year. Yeah. Just like everybody seemed to have worked at Gavin Brown at some point, and now I'm included.
But now Gavin Brown is not even working for Gavin Brown.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. I know. I was like, what?
But what were you doing there?
I was just an intern. I worked the front desk at the Uptown location and the Lower East Side location.
And what did you learn there?
I learned that I'm a terrible intern. I'm awful. I'm so bad. I'm terrible.
No, but what about the art scene, the art game?
I definitely having a behind the scenes look about how like collectors like actually like approach spaces like that, like over emails, and like how they inquire and like think about work. It definitely gave me a view into that. Which is why, I mean, it's in part of the reason, but also because of like my school and how I went to school towards the end of Columbia when I switched into the visual arts part. It's led me to a lot of, I kind of make work more as like props to hide things more so than like making artworks, I feel. Hide things, like hide my intentions, basically.
But do you think, do you have some critiques about the art system, for example, after being at Gavin Brown?
Not particularly because of Gavin Brown now, but generally I have my critiques. I mean, my sculptures are made out of garbage that get
that's why. From Gavin Brown to garbage, there's a big gap, right?
I did start working with garbage a few months before Gavin Brown, though. So was it a reaction? But it's definitely, I was even my friend Taylor even put me in a group show at Gavin Brown the summer after I started interning, and I was maybe going to show garbage, but I ended up showing this kind of weird thing. I don't regret showing it, but it was like this weird, like it was more of like within my drawing.
But let's speak about garbage after, but I would like to understand when you are young, you are interning in a gallery and you can witness all the hypocrisy of the art system, money and all that. What was your vision?
Well, my vision was that I was never going to get bought into a game of having to extrapolate on who I was as an artist, like my personal life, my personal history, in order to have that be like a addition to my work, have that be like a reason collectors would collect my work is because they need so-and-so artists of like so-and-so background to be in their collections. So that's why I've taken like a very like practice, like kind of based in anonymity in terms of like the objects and really questioning like the authorship of like works. Like when I work with garbage, when I work with like in painting, when I work with things like where you just can't tell who's who, what's going on. But they're still figurative and representative of like a situation, but it's just not there. And then when I work with like poetry, that's, I mean, my initial practice, which was very much about using language like kind of against itself, so that it wouldn't create like situations of like being too diaristic or too personal. I guess getting away from the personal is definitely my reaction to having worked within these systems, but then also having gone and been taught in the way that I was in my final year at school about an artist practice, where I was making works that mostly works on fabric at that time that were very like confrontational. It seemed very aggressive and like violent. And then they would ask questions about like, well, why don't you show yourself in the studio making this so that we can understand it more? And I was so offended by that question that I made like a whole performance of it at MoMA PS1 in 2018 about just canceling out both like who the audience gets to view during a performance, making objects live during the performance, but instructing my friends to do it around me. So basically creating this kind of like puppet theater of how I make work, but not having it be me. And well, I wish I had proper documentation of this performance, but it's something I'm expanding upon now that I'm thinking about now. But yeah, it's definitely, yeah.
Sorry. So I would like us to begin with the beginning, which means, how did you decide to become an artist? What are the circumstances?
The circumstances, sorry, it's cold. I'm like in front of my open window because my table's upstairs being used. So I came to New York to study at Columbia because I met artists and nightlife like personalities on the internet, on Tumblr, and then on Facebook that were all in New York. Like partying and like partying and like dressing up and also making like artwork and like performance art. And I was very attracted to that. Like from LA, there was a scene in LA, but the scene in New York seemed stronger. And then I met one friend in particular who was going to Columbia, and then I became their friend. We became friends when I basically reached out to them on the internet because I was applying to schools and was like, oh, how can you be doing all this wacky performance art in New York in the clubs and going to this school? I heard this school's awful. At the time I was like, oh, like I'll go to Yale or I'll go to Hampshire College, like a more like communist like school in the woods, I'll go somewhere crazy. And then that friend was like, actually, it's not that difficult and it's fine. And you get to be in New York. So what's your question? And I was like, okay, I guess I'll go. So I applied and I got in. And then basically because of that, I was, my first job in New York was as Susan Barch's assistant. This nightlife impresario in New York, who was actually Swiss, but I didn't know until later. Funny connection. So then I was curating nightlife spaces that had a lot of performance art components and also artwork components, but like in the clubs.
Wow.
and then after that, I interned at the Whitney Museum the summer after my freshman year and was one of their youngest interns within the curatorial and education department. I was interning. And then I worked in like fashion PR after that. And then I interned for a stylist. And around that time, like middle of college, all of my friends were either artists or stylists or designers.
But your family background was not artistic oriented at all?
No, my mother works for the police department in Los Angeles administratively. No, not so artistic at all. Nobody in my family did anything so artistic. I mean, they all sometimes, like now my grandmother, she does like weekly art classes sometimes, but no, not artistic.
So your discovery of the artistic scene came from the night.
From the nightlife, yeah. From the nightlife and all these friends in the night that were all doing one thing or another related to this. And then they would like invite me to like be part of their like film projects for like Vice. They would be doing like a Vice art movie, or they would be filming some music video, and then the people like, the artistic directors, or I would be doing a photo shoot when I started modeling during school, and then the artistic director of the photo shoot would be like Alex Decor. So I was always around these artists. And eventually I was like, okay, I'm doing like fashion, I'm doing like nightlife things, a friend basically told me, you have eggs in too many baskets, you kind of need to decide on one and like go for it. And I was like, okay, but now obviously I decided on art, but now I'm like doing like 4 different mediums and like doing all this stuff in that curatorial.
I want us to speak about that, the diversity of what you are doing.
Yeah. For me, I would just be very bored if I stuck with one media, because I think it's part of the same thing where like I'm actively trying to erase my authorship with most of the work that I do. So I feel like if I were to stick with one media over time, other than just getting bored, then it would expose me as like a singular artist that's doing this one thing. But if I'm doing a performance and then a curatorial project and then a reading thing, and then if I'm writing a script for a horror movie, and if I'm doing paintings in between that, and if I'm doing drawings in between that, and if I'm doing, it helps me stay like elusive. And for me, it's very important for me to like feel like elusive to like my own like capabilities in any subject, because you know how there are painters that paint every day and then they get better and better and better until they're like geniuses at it. I don't think I ever want to be a genius at anything other than like managing like my own like personality and like my engagements with people. And I think my engagements with people require that I be able to step into a lot of roles to best like fulfill those things. So like a Swiss Army knife, I have to be ready in that way.
What's the problem about being a genius after all?
I think it could probably be a bit lonely. I'm a people person. I think my intelligence is mostly social. I mean, I was definitely very intelligent when I was younger, but my background is community organizing. I was a community organizer in high school, and that's still how my brain is wired. Very leftist politic, very community-based work, very like, part of our thing was like one of the things we used to do is like you would have to go into the buses in the low-income neighborhoods where I was from and talk, and I spoke Spanish, so I had to do this in Spanish with like, people of like all ages on the bus, and basically tell them, hey, they're going to cut your bus line and this is going to like prevent you from making this much money because they're funneling it to like light rail for tourists. And this is like a working class versus like upper class issue, and like kind of have to get a little bit like really espouse some politics very quickly on the bus and get them to sign a petition and get them to come to an event and etc. And I was doing this when I was like 14, 15, 16.
Wow.
Along with like lobbying work, like in the state's capital, along with like, I knew how to like put on like a suit and tie, and knew how to like, be with people like on the buses, and knew how to like be in these meetings, and knew how to like train people on like how school policy was like sending them further and further down the line to prison because they were Black and brown, disabled, queer, etc. But then I went to college.
Sorry, so in a way you are a social artist.
Yeah.
You need interaction.
I need interaction for it to do anything, which is why I feel that most of the shows that I end up doing when I am invited to do a solo project anywhere, it becomes a thing where I need to be in the place for at least a month or two, and I have to like make it really centered on like where I am, which is why I just did a show in Tbilisi, and that show like I made for like my friends in Tbilisi, even though it's writing from the last 3.5 years after my first book, which was about college, because that was my main locale. That's where I was. And this new book that I just released in Tbilisi is called Guest House, as opposed to the older book, which is called Carmen, which was a dorm at my college. But now it's Guest House, and it's just acknowledging that I've been jumping around for a while, but I'm ultimately hosted by people. So I have relationships with these people that extend also to my artist practice, which makes some people, I don't know, I've had some people that I really like, but then maybe I don't like them after a while, just really like say that, it's frustrating that I'm not fossilizing my own practice as I go, and that it's always changing. And I'm like, well, I'm 25, like what can I possibly fossilize? It's not going to be different in 10 years. So yeah.
Could you speak about your practice of painting?
Yes, yeah. So I started painting after my second show of this garbage sculpture in Zurich. I had just come back from Zurich, and I was very depressed because I was like, oh God, like, because I knew my only way to come to Switzerland would be to get into an art school, and then it would give me a visa, and then I can stay.
That's why. Okay.
Yeah. So after that first trip to Switzerland in 2018 in the summer, when I fell in love with it and had a great time, I went back to New York, and I was very depressed. I had also just had a recent breakup. It was very drama. But at that time, I definitely couldn't afford a studio. My trash practice is not a studio practice. It's very much something, it's It's more of like it's more of a happening with like me, myself, and like some music and energy drinks and maybe a little alcohol, but usually just energy drinks because I'm working with like heavy objects and I don't want them to fall on me. Because I do all my own stunts. I do them myself by myself. But I came back and I was like, okay, well, I want to be able to work on something artistically and I want to be able to kind of like get at that, but I also want to do something new. So the studio I was able to afford, which at the time I found it, or actually my roommate found it. I was living with Hannah Black at the time, and we shared a studio. And I was like, okay, well, what can fit in here? Paintings. And then I did these paintings on plywood, like 18 paintings on plywood from the lumberyard, because that's something that I had done before, somewhat haphazardly in Miami for like my first sculpture show, when I was doing painting was the one thing in school at Columbia in that last year that I couldn't get a handle on. I didn't even finish my assignment about like the color mapping of like how to get every color and you put it into a little box and you have to do it as like your first assignment for like an intro painting class at my school. And I couldn't even do that right. I was just like, oh my God, like I can't get to like this kind of brown. And I was like, oh God, they're gonna fail me. It was very dramatic. But everything else I excelled in. I was great at collage, I was great at sculpture, I was great at like performance, and I even did like a few video things. But painting I could not get a grip on. So I got this painting studio and basically was working on very like kind of like graphic, more inspired by my drawing practice, and like graphic in the sense of like it looked like cartoons what I was drawing. And then my studio mate Hannah and roommate Hannah was like, okay, these are fine, but they're also a bit weird. Why don't you work with something that you have available to you like readily and not make up something? And why don't you like work on something that you could bear to look at for a while? So then I had all of these photos from college that I had just taken like post-coital, like, I like this person and they're asleep and like I hope something manifests, or like me like kind of depressed in my bathtub, or like me just taking pictures of like outfits or like ways that I was like presenting myself. But it was all during this like period of discovery that was college. I mean, for everyone it was a period of discovery, but for me, I mean, it was like a time when like my body was changing, everything was changing, like it was intense. And I was, in that way, I looked at it as like, okay, I'm spending all this time, or a lot of time in the recent past, playing with other people's garbage. Let me play with my own, which is like these trash photos that I thought would make it onto Instagram as something like kind of like moody and like, oh, this is my mood right now. But also kind of like, I was also like, oh God, I hope this manifests into something. Maybe this is a picture I could look at further along in the relationship, because I'm such a fucking romantic. My Venus is in Cancer, I have Cancer, but it's bullshit. But my moon's in Aquarius, so luckily I can turn into a robot when I need to, which has been the last 2 years of just like, no, I don't, no, stuff, mushy stuff. But luckily I still have all of these photos from when I was stupid that are very beautiful. When I thought like engagement and relationships were real.
But that's
and
great.
I was like, this is my own garbage.
We have nothing better than to believe in love, no?
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. And let me see, I could show you one of the photos from that era that made it into the paintings. But basically I only had so many like photos from that time.
Of yourself, right?
Yeah. I only had so many photos from that time that I had, but something that I would do to like not do straight on, like I'm just copying a picture, is like, you know how at the museum, this is like a portrait? Well, this is a landscape photo. So I fit it all in and I kind of replay. That allows me to replay with the, you know, the fitting, like how things fit in. This is my favorite one. But you know, like it allows me to play with like how things like fit into a space so that it still stays interesting to me, because I could definitely just go out and get like a canvas exactly this size and just copy it. But there was something about like the elongating and like fitting in that adds to the effort that I try to make, where I do things automatically. And it's important for them to be automatic. They could take longer. For example, me working automatically with sculpture means that I'll finish a sculpture installation that people really love within 4 hours in a night. But me working on like a painting project that people really love and doing it automatically because I don't know how to do underpainting and like classical painter tricks, I really just keep building and building and building on. That will take maybe 4 hours for a single painting, which for me is a lot. For me, I'm like, I can't be bothered with it. But if I'm making 18 at a time, because I work in sets of 18 with paintings, which means that I start on one and then go to the next one until I'm done with the 18. And then I go through a second round in the same order. And then usually by that time they're done. And then maybe a few aren't. And then I'll go back to the ones that I feel aren't done. But I work in a very chaotic way, but it's very organized.
But you work in series, so.
I work in series, yeah.
And when do you decide to paint?
I decide to paint. When I paint, I mean, it turns into, oh my God, in New York, it was very dramatic. I just had this breakup and I would have like a small bottle of like Jack Daniels in my painting studio and like some energy drinks. And then I would come home at like 2 a.m. on the train from Times Square, that's where my studio is. And I would come back to Brooklyn, get out, get a double bacon cheeseburger, have another beer, go to sleep, wake up at noon, and then do it again. And then that's what I was doing because I was trying to get over something very unhealthy. Very unhealthy. But now it's a bit more healthy, but it turns in, I tend to have to do one thing at a time and then just focus on it for like at least a week.
And so last question, what is your next dream?
Next dream, to move back and feel very fulfilled in New York.
You want to move back?
Yeah.
Why?
I just want to come back in a very like empowered, like how Sarah got her groove back. That's my dream. I'm just like, like I am like a very vindictive Cancer, and I'm just like, I want to go back and look great and be fab and have all my projects lined up, and like I just want to feel like very like radiating this like energy, which it really took me leaving for 2 years to get back to like a place of like, yeah, this like positive, happy, but very on top of my own thing place. So that's my dream right now, is literally just to go back and be with my friends and be in a city that has previously been very complicated for me in a lot of ways, and just feel very empowered and great and feeling like very glamorous and smelling great with all my
wow.
Yeah.
I can't smell anything from so far. That's a shame. Tell me, but when could it be?
The beginning of 2022. Mm-hmm.
Très bien. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.